you
Mhm.
were one of my dream guests, and I never thought it would be possible because you were quite elusive. Even on your records, it was. I remember one of the records was guitar.
This is
Guitar was
true.
none of your
This is true.
fucking business. And I just remember going to see No Means No, and it was right after you had left the band, and I just remember thinking that's not that guy. I was, I don't know, 18 maybe, and I missed your voice,
Yeah.
even though you and Rob and John, the voices were similar in certain characteristics and things. I knew that your voice
Yeah.
wasn't getting. I wasn't hearing your voice, and I knew that that guy wasn't.
Mm.
He was playing fine, but it wasn't you. And I didn't know there were no pictures of you. Back then there were maybe some fanzines, and
Yeah. Yeah.
it's
People say that a lot now.
it's true though. And then I realized a friend or somebody was like, no, their guy was named Andy Kerr and he left the band. And I was like, shit. And so
Mm.
then this is before the internet. So then because I'm nuts, I went on this deep dive of like, I needed to figure out who you were and what you do and if you're doing anything currently. And by that point,
Mm.
I believe you had Hissanol. And I picked up the Hissanol stuff, and that gave
Right.
me my sort of Andy Kerr fix for a while. And then you stopped doing Hissanol. And as a guitar player, I just always wanted to see you play because for the underinitiated,
Mm.
you are, in my opinion, one of the greater guitar players, not just punk rock guitar players, but I mean, it's
Oh, that's really nice.
absolutely the
That's
truth, though.
I'm
The fact that
it's nice to hear it. Thanks.
the, the the riff to It's Catching Up, I mean, Jesus Christ. And
Mm.
I implore anyone that's listening to this podcast, because it is a nerdy guitar podcast. If you've never heard No Means No, well then shame on you. But B, go listen to the song It's Catching Up and learn how to play that riff. And that is Andy Kerr that I'm talking to today. It's also your voice though. You have this seething um ill will towards humanity and in your voice. That's the only way I could explain it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
and you seem like a
Yes,
lovely, lovely
yeah.
man, and we just met, but it's in your voice when you sing or emote or anything. It's just this thing that like they never had after you, and I love me some No Means No, but I'm not a fan of No Means No after Andy Kerr. It just seemed like there was so much gone after that, and
Well, it's a
sure,
different sort of era, and I think the songwriting changed a bit, and of course because they had a different lineup as well. I think
sure,
that gives it a different sound, and I'm really happy with pretty much everything that we did in the 8 years or so
yeah, so am
that
I.
I was in the band, and so yeah, it's nice to hear. Some people, actually, a lot of people got into the band after I left, and people who were
Yeah,
like 18 or 16 years old, and they saw No Means No, say, in 1996 or 1998 for the first time. And so for them, they have a completely
right,
different sort of perspective on things. I know people in the Victoria scene who, think when they say No Means No, they think of Rob and John playing
sure.
bass and drums by themselves during the Mama period, which is like before me, and that's how I got to know them. And so yeah, in a way, if people say, well, what's your favorite No Means No album, it's like, well, it's probably Mama, because they were friends of mine, and I saw those songs grow and watched them live
Right.
and did sound for them live, and until they came up with a really bright idea and said, well, why don't you come up for a song or two? It's
Right.
like, oh, okay, sure. And then they wanted me to do more, and I was like, no, 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 you guys are destroying the concept. This is not
Right.
good.
Right. Right.
Bass and drums. Keep it like bass and drums. But they were very
Right.
persistent, and yeah. And then Robbie lost his voice too, which meant I did more work. So it
Yeah.
wasn't work; it was fun. And so yeah, so that was my time. And so a lot of people, yeah, uh, they look at that
Right.
as one particular era.
It's like three different eras. There
And
was like the early era of just those guys, and then you, and then Tom coming in,
mm,
and then it was a
no, no,
different
Tom
band. I
era,
mean, I
yeah,
guess
indeed.
that's the best way to put it. It was a different band after you left, in my opinion. Um,
Hmm.
because you are such a discernible, like I said, such a discernible player and such a discernible voice. And well, let's go back. So you just brushed on it a little bit there. What were you doing before No Means No? Like, how did you get started playing guitar and playing in bands and things like
Well, it was, it's it's in the new NomeansNo notebook that Jason Lamb
that?
and
Yeah.
Paul Prescott just brought out, and uh, I picked up the guitar when I was little just because I listened to songs on the radio and I wanted to play along with the songs. And my sister had an acoustic guitar, and she was taking, folk guitar lessons at school. And my brother had an electric guitar in his basement. He was 4 years older, and he was trying to learn how
Right.
to play Jumpin' Jack Flash. So, and he had a Creedence Clearwater Revival songbook, and so I stole that from his room, or borrowed it from his room, and went into my sister's room, got her guitar, and then because she wasn't using it much, and just sat and learned all the basic
Yeah.
chord
Yeah.
structures. You know those guitar books, right? It's like, put your finger here, put your finger here. It's like, G, I can do that.
Right.
D7,
Right.
I'm not quite there yet, and so yeah, I just sung along to songs that were on the radio in the 1970s, and but actually then punk rock happened, and then I just sort of woke up in a way. I just thought, this is it. This is everything before it suddenly seemed old. Of course, it was
Right.
not really that old, but to me it seemed old. And then I got in this band with a friend of mine named Kevin Lee called the Infamous Scientists, and our drummer Murray Jackson. And yeah, we created this local band. We started out playing punk covers and yeah, Clash and Sex Pistols
Yeah.
and Subhumans and all that. And we started writing some of our own songs and played small local shows in Victoria. And that was great. And I couldn't have asked for a better
Yeah.
musical youth. And the scene sort of began to happen in the maybe late 1980. And then, so we were in that band, but then the drummer, he left, and then we had got to know Rob and John because they'd recorded our first 7-inch record. And we asked John if he would like to be our drummer. And then John drummed. It was like, oh, goodness me, wow, what a talent. And so we did a 12-inch EP after that and played a few shows. We played with
That's
X,
cool.
which was probably our best show. And yeah, it was really cool in 1981. And yeah, and then after that, bass player said, "Oh, I don't want to do this anymore." And we were kind of like, "Oh, okay." And then I didn't really think about being in a band, but I was still hanging out with Rob and John, and I said, "Well, let me learn how to do sound, because I'd like to learn how to do that." And so I started doing their sound for them live. I wasn't very good,
Yeah. Sure.
but I learned a lot. And then, and like I said, they invited me for a show to do, um, I think, uh, "Stop It" by Pylon was one of the songs, and I think "No Sex," which was a two-piece song
Okay.
that they added a guitar to, and I was going to play that.
Oh,
And maybe
that's
Maybe
cool.
Manic Depression as well. And so I think
All right.
I did like 3 songs, and people knew me from the other band, so it was really fun. And then I guess after that, I don't even remember. They just said, "Well, you feel like writing some songs
Wow.
with us?" And
Wow.
yeah,
Wow. Well, I mean, they definitely benefited from that proposal, I would say. Um, because, like I said, it's really hard um, to have a discernible voice on the guitar. It's all been done. So when you can hear someone play and go, "That is such and such," I believe that is sort of the greatest honor, and that's
hmm
what we're all sort of striving for. I don't think I've found that. Um, we're all too close to our own thing, but I can hear you play and say, "Well, that's Andy Kerr," and
that's a really nice compliment. I mean, I think of if I
right,
hear like a Greg Ginn solo, I know
absolutely,
it's a Greg Ginn solo. It's absolute. There's no. I can't. How the guys in Flag play
yeah,
that. I have no idea because I've tried on occasions to do the uh, you know to play like a Greg Ginn. I
yeah.
just can't. I cannot figure out
Well,
how the notes are supposed to go. And then there's people like Bruce Anderson, who died a couple of years ago, sadly, from MX80 Sound, was another guitar player who I just was like, I just didn't understand. I just loved his guitar playing, but I couldn't understand it. And yet there it was.
Right.
There was that sound that was
So,
him. Um, so yeah, it's a nice compliment. But then again, that's I think all bands have that sort of
right.
unique quality in them. I think the people who are fans of the bands can probably recognize that maybe more or more readily than people
Yeah.
who aren't familiar with
Well,
the
and I
band
think it has something to do
classically.
with the pedigree of and the great pantheon of great Canadian musicians. There's something that happens up there where you're not sort of it's almost like by osmosis. It's like because you are from there in it because it is just on its own plane, like for me, I'm a huge Rush fan, and and I know that was so
Mm,
anti-punk or punk was anti that or whatever it was, but there is something so different about Canadian music that's always stood up head and shoulders above American music to me because there isn't this adherence to like this American sound or whatever it is. America can become so
mm,
sameness, with what it's trying to do. There isn't a
mm.
particular Canadian sound. I think on the you know what I mean
Yeah, yeah, that's
on
weird. Yeah, I never
yeah
really thought about that
on
actually.
the contrary, I
That's a
think
good
the
question.
Canadian sound is
Yeah.
really to just do the thing that you do. It's sort of like the early punk when no
Mm,
band sounded the same, but it was all punk rock, and now all bands sound the same that are called
mm.
punk rock. I
Yes.
think Canada just kind of stayed in that sort of that great idea of it.
Yeah, that might be true. I mean, I certainly know that in, what whatever was the scene, bands that knew each other and played shows together and, were friends for years, often made music which was radically
Absolutely.
different from each other. But maybe it's because there's less people there, and so there's way less. There's like a tenth of the amount of bands there, but you have just a larger country to go across. So yeah, we found ourselves, especially in the early time, playing with all sorts of Canadian bands that were, yeah, some were just like party bands, other bands were like
Right.
really heavy, other bands were funky, and yeah, if we liked the people, then we would just get on with them and end up playing shows with
Yeah.
them and get to know each other. I do remember that um, the Vancouver Complication. I don't know if you know that record, but it was a compilation that came out in 1979 in Vancouver of the Vancouver scene, and that scene, at least for us in Victoria, was incredibly important because it was very, very diverse, and it didn't sound like Minor
Right.
Threat or the Dead Kennedys or not that I'm a
Sure.
huge fan of both of those bands and all sorts of bands in the States, but it had its own sound. I mean, DOA is certainly the most famous sound, but all sorts of bands that even to this day probably only people in Vancouver and
Right.
Victoria know. And U Jerks, Young Canadians, yeah, the just all kinds of bands. Too many to mention, but they certainly had it was a very diverse scene, and yet it was
Right.
one scene. Everyone knew each other, and yeah, I think that carried on
Well,
throughout
I
the
think it's
years,
look
at
at
least in
three
my
of
time in the band,
Canada's
anyway.
biggest musical imports, which, one, your version of classic rock was Rush, which no one could emulate Rush. No one sounded like Rush. No one ever will. Your
Hmm.
your version of punk rock was No Means No, which no one could sound like No Means No one ever will. And your version of metal was Voivod, which is like the most, yeah, you know what I mean?
Yeah, Voivod,
This
yes.
mind blowing, still one of my favorite bands of all time.
Yeah.
And and I think that encapsulates Canadian music really, and the fact that it's still pushing itself and doing this, stylistic sort of creative endeavors and not sort of resting on its laurels. Um, all three of those bands, no one sounds like any of those bands. They might have influenced a lot, but
Hmm.
Jesus Christ, good luck trying to play any of it. Um, so anyway, okay, well, so you sort of you left No Means No after 8 years, and what that was just
Yeah.
to move to Amsterdam, just to you.
Well, no, actually, what it was that it was a
I
number
know
of
covered
things.
in
I
the book.
mean, it's sort of like asking, so why did you break up
Right.
with your girlfriend? It's not like uh, that there was great acrimony or anything like that. But I think that for me, uh, I was not
Sure.
having so much fun in the band as we did before because we were successful. And it was great we were successful. I mean, I remember, I guess it was probably the year before I left, um, I actually had enough money to live off of,
Right.
which was just remarkable. It was what a concept that you would actually not need to have
Right.
a part-time job. Um, and so that was great. And we were becoming more popular. And we came to Europe, once a year. We went to the States once a year. We went across Canada once a year. And I remember at a certain point, I guess it was after Zero Plus Two. It's like, okay, well, we got these songs. We need to work on write some songs for the next album. And it was literally now getting into each year meant the tours, the European tours, the American tours, the Canadian tours, maybe some other tours. And
Yeah.
I like touring. I love touring. Sort of people are getting it wrong if they read that Andy was tiring of touring. I
Yeah.
really love to go tour. I think it was one of the most fun things I ever did. But it became this
Yeah.
sort of ritual then, and that we need some new songs, better write them. Whereas up until that point, we wrote songs, and if they were ready in 2 months, great. If we played them for 3 years until we thought, yeah, I think they're good enough to record, then we did that. And before I left, we used to all live in the same city. We hung out together an awful lot, but we were getting older too, and Rob moved to Vancouver, and yeah, we just didn't hang out with each other so much. And then the band just sort of became
Sure.
more like a
Sure.
job,
Sure.
and it's not a bad job, but in a way that uh, for me that I was missing just the sort of fun part
Right.
of it. I was very fortunate to have been in No Means No and to play with Rob and John and to have toured and to meet all the people in the scene and thankful for all the people in the
Yeah.
scene who made it possible for us to do all this. But at a certain point, I thought, I'm kind of cheating myself here. I'm if I go on and just write a song or play a gig because it's the next gig on the tour and we're getting this much money and we're selling this many T-shirts,
Wow.
that wasn't enough for me, and I wanted to do something different. I was hitting at the end of my 20s, and I kind of thought, I want to do something different with my life, and so I did. And I happened to at that time have been involved with um, Ingrid, who is from Amsterdam, and she was like, I'd left the band, and she's like, well, I'll come to Canada, move to Canada. I said, well, I'll come to Amsterdam, move to Amsterdam. And so we had to sort of not flip a coin, but I said, okay, well, I'll come to Amsterdam, and let's see how it goes there. And I'm still
I
here,
think that was a
so I
wise
love it
choice.
here.
Every time I go to Amsterdam, I'm like, shit, why don't I live in Amsterdam? This place is amazing. Yeah. Yeah. Especially since
Well, next time you're in town,
yeah,
look
I
me up.
would
Go out for a
absolutely
cup of
love
coffee.
that, Andy, and you're going to regret that offer. Yeah, especially since America's such a flaming shit show right now. So it would be just amazing to come there more often. But
Yeah,
I
America could be so
know.
much better than it is. I mean, I tell people, people say, "Oh, Americans this, Americans that." I have met in my life so many genuine, sweet, kind, giving people in the United States, and who aren't essentially voting for
Yeah,
Donald Trump. Uh, uh, and
it could
it could
be.
be so great there.
It.
It's such a beautiful
I
country.
know.
It's so diverse. It is so big. It is
I
it's
know.
like you got New
You're
Orleans.
right.
You have New Orleans. I
What
mean,
else?
what else? You
You're
should be
totally right.
grateful and thankful for that. Like the best city in the world, and it's
But
like
it's other. Yeah.
yeah. But hey, there
If
are other
Trump
issues
gets
going on.
elected again, I actually probably I will move. I mean, I live in Texas too, so like I not only am I in America, I live in at least
Whereabouts
I
in
live in
Texas do you live?
Austin. I live in Austin, Texas. Yeah, I'm from Texas. I'm
Ah,
born
Austin.
and
Okay.
raised in Texas, but if all sort of like-minded people, that are sort of, kind of end up in Austin if you're from Texas, you know what I mean? Um,
Liberty Lunch was in
Liberty
Austin,
Lunch
right? Does
was
that
in
still
Austin.
exist?
Yes, it does not exist. It's a library now. But
Ah,
I did play many times there and went there many times. But I loved it. Um, what was I going to say? So to comment a little bit on what you were just saying about leaving the band, i- that's being so good with your own boundaries, your own sort of. I found myself in that same position so many times where, not that I questioned what I wanted to be doing. I always wanted to do what I do, but maybe the band I was
Mm.
in at the time, there has been so many times where I just didn't have the sort of guts to be really honest with myself and just go, wait,
Yeah.
I don't want to do this, and hold out for something better, and move on. There's been many times, where
Mm.
maybe all roads pointed to that, but because I'm terrible with my boundaries, I just didn't do it. So that's highly commendable, I think, that you did walk away from that. You know.
Yeah, yeah, I'm glad I did. I have absolutely like zero regrets. I at no point do I regret leaving, but I have no regret staying for 8 years. I had the best time of my life, a fantastic young 20s. I spent essentially all my 20s was spent in the band. Um, but yeah, and it was another experience. I moved on to other things. I mean,
I
hey,
wasn't
you were in
Guar.
Guar at one point.
I
That was
wasn't
no
Guar.
doubt another.
I'd
I have a
love.
Guar story
I'd love
for
to
you
hear it.
actually. I don't think you would have been in the band. You'd have been too young. But when we were playing in Germany in
Oh
Bielefeld,
yeah,
which was this small place, great place there, and the night before us, Guar had played, and
yeah,
of course, when
yeah,
Guar plays, there's blood. I mean,
yeah.
there's just blood. And so people said, "Oh yeah, Guar was here last night," and we looked around, and it's like all this
Uh huh.
sort of pinkish
Everywhere.
red stuff everywhere. It's like, okay. So we play our show, and it's a really warm show, and it's really small, sort of like almost like a large garage. There's virtually no ventilation. And at a certain point during our set, and everyone's sweating, the guar blood starts dripping, dripping down on our faces and our instruments, and we're just like
Yeah,
looking down and looking up,
yeah.
and all this.
It's like you're welcome.
It was
Yeah,
so
there you
funny.
go. I mean, it's funny that you mentioned that because A,
Yeah.
I didn't know that you knew that, and B, I wasn't gonna, but that was the band that I actually did, and it was in my 20s as well. Walk away from much the same, because it was that kind of thing where
Mm.
I was like, okay, I have ceased to have fun. Like through whatever
Yeah.
extenuating circumstances. Oddly enough, I still am in conjunction with those guys. I
Hmm.
still sort of go back and write and work and do stuff with them, which is great. But yeah, it
Yeah.
was that kind of thing. So when you were telling me that story, I was sort of relating it to that experience with me, where I was like, to anyone else, it'd be like, why are you leaving Guar? It's Guar. This was great. It's like, well, you don't. There's an inner working sort of
Yeah. Yeah.
situation that
Yeah.
you have to be there for.
Mm.
You know, but yeah, that's funny. And I mean, welcome to the whole time I was in that band, I was just stained red. Always, like, always. You couldn't get it off. I have gear. My
What was
I
your
was a
name?
character called
What was your
Flatus
name, Gore?
Maximus. So yeah. So that, and they have since retired that character. The guy that played the character after me died. He passed away, so they retired the character died. But
Oh,
before that, if you were the guitar player in
yeah.
Guar, you were just that character. And yeah, and they have a new
Uh,
guitar player now, a friend of mine, a guy named Tommy Meehan, who seems to be doing great, and they're still plugging away and doing great. So that's it's kind of awesome. But yeah,
cool.
Guar, Jesus Christ. Um, and so your last record was 0 + 2 = 1, which, and I love that record. It's a fantastic
Yeah.
record. Um, and before that, the seminal sort of Wrong record. How long had you guys been working on Wrong before you
Yeah.
recorded it?
Some of those songs were around for 3 years or so. I think there's a couple that were even 4 years old, and we tended to have
Right.
songs hanging on for a long time. Um, and uh, it's people sometimes see videos online of them and they go, "Oh, I didn't realize that song was that from that time." Um, but yeah, it was. We didn't really intend to maybe write differently, but we wanted
Right.
it to sound different, and it was more straight ahead than the album that
Yeah.
came before it, Small Parts. And um, there were a lot of friends of ours that went, "Oh yeah, well you just made a straight ahead record." Where Small Parts was all over the place. It's not a great sounding record, but I like
It's great.
the ideas on it. um, but yeah, Wrong. We just got sort of down to the basics, sound-wise, and it was a success in terms of it was just a really good time for songwriting. It was a good time. We were like the other albums. We spent a lot of time
Right.
arranging songs. The thought of a band going into a studio and saying, "I have this idea for a song. Let's work it out in the studio." I hear stories like that. I
Yeah.
mean, okay, if you're the Beatles, right, you're getting millions of dollars. You go in.
Right.
That's just beyond me. We made sure we had everything completely down. So we would spend as little time in the studio and could just focus on playing what we wanted to play, how we wanted to
Yeah.
uh, play it, and in a way which might surprise people, that uh, at least in the last, I think, 20 years, or certainly since time with Steve Albini,
Yeah.
recording bands like Slint and that. The idea of you get a band in a room together and with a few
Just go
mics
for it.
and just you know record the band as one thing. We got together and played so that John could get a good drum track. And once John got a really good drum track, then Robbie went into the uh, the studio room and he said, "I'm going to do my
Yeah.
bass parts now." It's like, okay. And he'd do his bass parts, and then we'd go off or be sitting there, you know, smoking in the next room, and then you get a call, or you say, "Oh yeah, Robbie's done his bass parts. So I can come in and do your guitar parts." Okay,
Just
and then
all.
I would just do my guitar parts and doing a lot of drop-ins and saying, "Oh, I can play that a little tighter," and everyone would be like, "Oh yeah, that's good. Yeah, like that."
Right.
Pre-digital, of course, and as spontaneous as that album actually eventually sounded like, it's strange because it was
Wow.
really pieced together.
No, it did
And
not.
we did sound like that
It
if you
did
listen to
not.
us play it live. Um, but it wasn't like us, recording that one
Wow.
take in a room. That's not how we
Wow.
recorded. Sorry to
Right.
all
Right.
you
Right.
people out there who might have thought so, but it
Right.
wasn't. We never did
Wow.
it that way.
Well, so I don't bombard you with gear questions all at once. I'm going to kind of pepper them in and out. And speaking of Rob Wright's bass tone, um, I
Yeah.
presume and I think, because I'm a dork, that I heard once there was a weird, it's a solid state Marshall Jubilee series bass head. Was that?
Ah,
Okay,
you can stop there.
please.
You can stop there because that's
Oh,
that's after
shit.
my time, and the original Rob sound was, well, the original sound, he actually had I think he had a Fender Bassman, which I ended
Okay.
up using as a guitar amp. And as even Rob said at the time, he said, "Fender Bassmans, shitty
Right.
bass
Yeah.
amps, great guitar amps," and he was right. But I think he played originally through that, and then um, shortly after they started playing live as a two-piece, he bought this acoustic amp. Um, what's it called? Acoustic, maybe 110, like
Okay.
110, something like that. Anyway, solid state amp, and uh, it had this EQ on it, like a 5-band EQ, and he would take the mids
Yeah.
right in the middle and just jack them up. That was the first sound that he had that he really was happy with his bass sound. He wasn't really happy with the bass sound that he had before. It was quite he could really growl, and there are some songs he could turn a few dials to make it happen. When he got that amplifier, then he suddenly had
Right.
what became his sound. The reason I think anyway, the reason he stopped using it was that he'd stick it on top of his cabinets. Of course, Rob played at such loud volumes that all the circuitry
Oh,
would like
wow.
crack at a certain point,
Sure.
and it just amp would just because it was vibrating so much. And so then he would take it in and then get it fixed, and then this would happen semi-regularly. So after I left, he quite wisely moved on to another amp, which actually I think has a better, deeper sound to it, and
Right.
he could do more things with it. But it was the acoustic amp that was his first. That he he's essentially, he would say as much. He was essentially a guitar
Wow.
player
Well,
who played
Jesus
the bass.
God. I mean, and it's. Am I wrong in thinking that there was a liberal amount of, say, like Strangler's influence with his playing? Okay.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Stranglers. Robbie was listening to a lot
Yeah.
of punk rock, and I mean, of course, he's like
Okay.
8 years older than John and I, so he went through the whole jazz rock thing, and but also things like Dr. Feelgood,
Sure.
Aerosmith, all
Sure.
that 70s stuff. And then he also found punk rock, and he said it was great because he heard the Ramones, and he thought
So
they
did
were all
I
brothers.
at first. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, they all had the same name. But he said it was
Sure.
like, an epiphany. But yeah, Stranglers, of course, were really bass heavy, but there
Sure.
was all this post-punk stuff happening at the time, which even more so than the punk stuff, the bass came really up. He listened to the
Oh,
Au
the au
Pairs a lot,
pairs.
Pill, of course,
The au
which has the
pairs.
bass, which is
Yeah.
like yeah, and yeah, absolutely. Au Pairs, and all kinds of bands
Yeah, for
where,
sure. For
Killing
sure.
Joke, certainly,
Yeah.
absolutely. And suddenly the bass was not just this sort of
Yeah.
rumbling noise in the background, but this
Yeah.
big aggressive thing. And when I joined the band, I thought, well, here's this big bass with this really growly sound, and I can't just
Right.
simply play chords over it. I can't. And I can't say, well, I'm going to have even more distortion, or I'm going to, sort of also have this deep sound. I thought that's not going to work. And so I tried to sort of fit in
Sure.
the gaps between Rob and John. And it, by accident, um, um, because the amp I had, which was a terrible Music Man
Right.
amp, it just sounded awful. And my friend Scott said, "Oh, a friend of mine has got an old Bandmaster, which, though it sounds so old now, at the time would have been, let's see, 1980,
Right.
well, it would have been like a 20-year-old amp." And I said, "Okay," and
Right.
knowing nothing about these things, just like buying my guitar, I knew nothing about it, and I plugged it in and just turned it
Right.
up to whatever 7, and it was like instant distortion.
Yeah.
It's like, great, that'll do. And until I started using the Bandmaster, which was, I mean, the Bassman, which sounded quite similar in my setup, and
Right.
was more reliable, didn't break down as much. Yeah, my guitar sound was simply plug it in,
Yeah.
turn it up, and play.
Wow.
No pedals, just.
Wow. Well,
You know. So I'm sorry that's what I meant earlier when I said I don't have
it's
really any great
okay.
technical stories. It was I um I did have a PA bin that they used to use for their practice in their basement
Uh-huh.
room, and it had these horns in it, like, like little practice PA things on the ground. And so I had two cabinets, and one was I think they were both 12-inch speakers, and the bottom cabinet was a little larger, this black cabinet, and on the top, my top cabinet was a
Wow.
PA bin with these horns, and so you could
Right.
get feedback really really easily. It was really nice, and so that plus the Bandmaster plus my Schecter guitar, which is a whole other story, is it gave me the sound, and people go, "How did you do it?" Just just got this thing
Just
and
totally
plugged it
by
in,
accident.
and
So
it
was it
seemed
was
to
it the
work.
bandmaster? It was a
And
bandmaster and a bassman together? Oh, just the band. Is
no,
the
no, just
bassman
just the
is the bassman
Bandmaster.
first and the bandman? Gotcha. Gotcha. Gotcha.
Just
But never pedals. Never pedals. Nothing.
yeah. Never pedals, no, and it never occurred to me. I'd used them for an effect in Self Pity. There was John Robb had
Hmm.
a Roland chorus echo unit, and sort of for a goofy effect, I used it in that. And I think one other song I may have used an effect in one or two other songs. But uh, to this day, I kind of curse the
Right.
fact that I've actually bought pedals because uh, I think it's sort of like someone who, if someone plays the trumpet, you know, it's not like they're continually, changing the trumpet. I
Uh,
got this other trumpet. I got this little extra trumpet. I've added this little piece to my trumpet. Just, I'm working on it now. It's not quite the sound I'm looking for, and I'm going to get another trumpet. They have the trumpet, and then all they need to
he's
concentrate
playing the
on
trumpet.
is playing, because the trumpet gives them the sound, and then it's what you do with that sound. And of course, you can do a zillion great things with pedals, obviously, and I rely on them now very much so, um, just to get sort of an approximation of the sounds that I want to have, um, but I can't get in through an amplifier. But I think that there is something to be said for just um, having a sound that you like, and then just controlling it maybe with your volume knob,
Yeah.
and like that's it. Then all you need to worry about is what you're playing because you like your sound. You don't need to worry about clicking your foot down somewhere or changing between things A and
Yeah,
B
that's
and
a great. That's a great way to put it. I never really
yeah.
thought, I never really thought about it like the trumpet analogy because you're absolutely right. Um,
Well, it's like if you have an acoustic guitar and you're sitting there playing acoustic, that acoustic guitar just stays the
right.
acoustic guitar. It just is what it is. And um, yeah, and it's a little bit. I find myself I'm completely guilty of it when I'm recording at home and sort of chasing after sounds that I never quite get, or they sound good one day and the next day I listen to it and I don't like it, and I hear some thing in a video or I listen to a part of a, a song that someone's written. I think, oh, it's like
Right.
that. No, I want that sound, and I try to get it. And I just
Wow.
yesterday found these videos, which was "Safe European Home" by the Clash,
Yeah.
disassembled like isolated parts. And it's so strange. You think of that album as being so sort of huge sounding. It was a big sort of rock record by Sandy Pearlman, who produced it. But and then you actually listen to the guitars that are
Right.
on the recordings, the individual tracks, and they're sort of weedy sounding little things,
Right.
but all together they were just fantastic. So yeah, I don't know. I
No,
have
I
no
mean,
answer to this. I'm 61 years
that's what
old.
this is
I
all about.
I don't know.
Um, I want to get into your Schecter guitar, but real quick before I move on, what bass amp did Rob actually use on Wrong? My brother, who was a bassist,
Oh, Ron, he absolutely used
no
the
shit.
acoustic
Wow.
amp. Yep. Yes.
And it was a head
100%.
or a combo amp.
Yes.
It was a head, like a acoustic. Wow.
Ahead. Ahead. Yeah, and he had a head, and he had a 4 by 10, I think, like a Fender cab, and then I think he had a 15-inch
No shit.
cabinet,
So an
big
acoustic
cabinet
head.
underneath.
Well, okay.
Yeah,
That
I'll later on. I have a. Oh, I won't dig it out now. It'll take too long. And we're on a video. But I will dig up the picture. I got a picture of it here somewhere, and yeah, what model it was
I
or
mean,
whatever. But
it's
yeah, it sounded great. It's just it wasn't it wasn't the most
right.
warm sounding
It's one
amp
of
in
the
the world.
greatest
That's
bass
not what he
sounds, in my
wanted.
opinion, of all time. It's just both you guys' tones on
Yeah,
that record are
fantastic.
so
Yeah.
they so accentuate and complement each other. It's so perfect. But I think it's also when you're playing, it's
Mm,
in your hands, both of you guys. I think you played together so well, and I think it was just something you cultivate when you've been with somebody for a long time. That relationship, that sort of vernacular.
mm.
Okay, so now let's get into your because I always just thought it was a Telecaster guitar, a Fender, like. But then I noticed there was humbucker pickups,
Mm,
and so it was actually a Schecter.
mm. It was a Schecter, and at the time, I'll do the Schecter story as short as I can. Um, so had a Vantage guitar when I was in Youth and the Scientist before No Means No, and I didn't really like that, so I thought I want a different guitar. And Rob said, "Oh, you should play my Strat." I said, "Okay, I'll play your Strat." And so in the last time of my time in the Infinite Scientist, I was playing this black Strat, 70s black Strat.
Okay.
And I really didn't like it. I didn't think it was what I was looking for at all. I mean, I was thinking punk rock, and Strat is not the most punk
Yeah.
rock instrument, or it can be. But it wasn't the sound I was looking for, and I didn't even know what a fucking humbucker was. Um, anyways, so after the band split up, and before No Means No, I guess, um, I went with my friend Scott to this music shop. I thought, oh, look for a guitar. And I said, well, let's go to this place. And so we went out of town and on the outskirts of Victoria, and there was this
Yeah.
Telecaster there. And I recognized the shape because Joe Strummer played a Telecaster. I thought, okay, Joe Strummer, right. I had no idea what humbuckers were. I picked it up. It was brown. It was brown wood, which seemed odd to me. But it was a Telecaster. I thought, oh, this looks nice. And there were two humbucking pickups, which I knew looked that meant they were different. And I played it just a little bit in the store. I went, yeah, okay, how much is it? And I was like, oh, it's whatever.
Yeah.
It was like $500 or something, which at the time was a big amount of money. But I remember Scott said, if you've got $500, you can buy a great guitar. And
Yeah,
now
yeah.
it's completely different. Thankfully, you can buy a great guitar for $100. But I was like, okay, and that was my guitar. And I eventually stained it a blue color, and found out that when it was really, really damp and sweaty, that my pickups would suddenly sort of shut down and
Right.
turn themselves off. Um, yeah, they had sort of a resin on the other
Oh,
side, on the flip side of them. It's sort of, so you don't see all the wires. It's just this like
right.
a tub of resin. Anyways, years later, because people would always ask me, it's like, oh, it's a Schecter, and it was a kit. It wasn't actually put together as a Schecter. It didn't have the Schecter logo on
Uh-huh.
the end of the neck
Uh-huh.
on the headstock. But it was a Schecter guitar on the inside, and with Schecter pickups. They were called
Super rock. Okay.
Super Rock
Okay.
pickups, 1R, Super Rock. And years later, I discovered, after the internet came along, what I actually had, and I said, okay, it was they sold parts to music shops. That was one of their
Okay.
concepts in their early days, and uh, the uh, the people who worked there, and one guy, I forget his name at the moment, um, uh, um, he was sort of in charge of this, and he and his buddies put together all these great quality parts, and then they got sent out to with a catalog, an order
Sure.
catalog,
Sure.
a mail order catalog. So I would like this pickup, and I want this nuts, and I want this headstock. And someone at a record store or music store, I should say,
Wow.
had put this together, and I guess they didn't want it or wanted to sell it and stuck it there. So I had all these Schecter parts. And so years later, when the internet happened, I wrote someone and said, "Do you know how to get?" I wrote Schecter. I said, "Do you know how to get in touch with the original people at Schecter?" And they sent a uh, an email of this guy. I feel so stupid not remembering his name at the moment. And uh, so I wrote him and said, "Okay, you don't know me. From a hole in the ground. I was in this band, NoMeansNo, who you probably also don't know. But this is my guitar. Here's a picture of it. And I have no idea where it's from. I have no idea. I'm assuming it's from the early 80s. He wrote back this
Whoa.
really, really nice letter. And this lovely letter saying, "Oh, yeah, I recognize that. I think, yeah, we put those things out. Oh, yeah. And you got a good deal, actually, $500." And
Wow.
it was really, really sweet. And so yeah, it, it ended up being a really uh, unique thing. And people would say, "Oh, where did you get your guitar?" It's like, well,
Yeah.
it was put together, and there's one of a kind. There's literally one in the world. I will say though that the essentially what it is the Pete Townsend
Right.
guitar that got made at the time, around the same time, with the
See,
Super Rock
okay.
pickups in it, the humbuckers. And would I want a copy of it? The wood, and that's not all so special. What makes that guitar
No
are
kidding.
the Super Rock humbuckers,
Wow.
and those things are great. So if I have seen them on sale, and I even considered buying them, but I thought, I have this guitar already. Why would I buy a second guitar? I'm not in a band that's touring. Why would I have a second guitar with the exact same humbuckers in the guitar that I
Well,
love and I play all the
it's
time?
because you're
So
logical
yeah,
and I am not. And I'm the guy that's like, I need to buy all of them that I can find because somebody else is going to get them and I'm not. You know, if I find something I like, well, so that makes so much sense. I have one of the original PT models because I'm also Pete Townsend's my idol,
oh
and
yeah, okay,
it's a long story. But your guitar has a pick guard, correct? It has a
yeah.
okay.
It had
See,
a
even
metal
weirder.
pickguard, yes,
So the original Pete Townsend models didn't have a
yeah,
pick guard. They didn't have them till later. Yeah. And so
that's true,
yours, I
that's
always
true, yeah,
wondered when I saw your guitar, then I heard it was a Schecter. I was like, it didn't make sense that it was a Fender because Fender Telecaster, they didn't put humbuckers in those guitars in the 80s. They didn't do that till much later.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
even still, they maybe with the Telecaster Deluxe, they did the wide range pickups and blah blah blah. But yours was always such an
yeah,
anomaly. And then if I'm jumping ahead a bit, but with the 2 pin DIN record, you guys have like pictures of your Telecasters, and there's one that it's like that little drawing, and it's of yours, and I'm like,
Oh, that's all.
yeah,
Wilf does those drawings. He's an amazing artist, and He'd like nothing better
It
than
was so
to
cool.
draw our
And but
guitars
I looked at that
on
picture
a
and I was like, fuck, if that's an
yeah
80s model guitar, like it has humbuckers and then a pick guard, and if it's a Schecter, that doesn't make sense. So now
yeah.
that's what this podcast is for, is to basically just answer these dorky questions that I have, that detailed minutia bullshit. But anyway, so that
Well, I tell you, they had had which again I didn't know what it was, but it had two
okay.
push-pull switches on it. So it had, your volume and tone, and when I pulled them, they made a different sound that I didn't like. I didn't even know it was things going out of phase. I didn't know if I had no idea what was happening. So I
Right.
never used them. And not only that, like maybe a lot of guitar players, I don't know, um, but I just played with my
Sure.
volume all the way up until actually the very last year of No Means No, and there was a couple of songs where I actually
Right.
had to turn it down to get a different sound, and but it was always like, oh, when it's up, it's really bright, and when you turn it down, it starts getting dull. So I keep it up, and then the tone knob. I would never think about
Yeah.
turning the tone knob, because as soon as you turn the tone knob, then it really does get really muddy and icky. So everything just stayed. The amp stayed the same.
Right.
The dials on the guitar stayed the same.
Well,
Um, yeah, but it was great. It is a great guitar. I still play it
well,
and love to
I'm
play it. It's and there's actually, yeah, there's I think at a certain point I was angry at something. Not I was not angry at my guitar, but I was busy with my hammer, and and at a certain point somehow I managed to hammer part of part of the body of my guitar. You can actually see this
uh,
sort of like almost like a coin size sort of dent in a I wish I knew the
That's
story
what makes
behind that.
guitars
It's
interesting. I would
yeah,
imagine. Did you
gives
roll
it
your volume
character.
off a little bit during the song, like say now? That's in on 0 plus.
Yes, yeah, that was in the last. I've
Well,
never done that before, and so there's that. And oh, what other one did I do it for? Yeah, but absolutely no. That was one of the few ones because I wanted to get a Wilco Johnson kind of Dr.
yeah,
Feelgood sound, and yet, without getting, changing guitars or something like that, the only answer was to turn it way down.
yeah.
I've since changed. I have a Mustang that I use now. A
Right, right.
totally cheap, it was my COVID guitar. It was a Squire Bullet Mustang, and I use the volume
That's
knob
awesome.
all the
So,
time, and
so
I love playing it. It's not a my Schecter guitar,
that's
but
awesome.
I have a
Well, so
blast
let's
playing it. So
you keep referring to music that you're doing now. What currently are? Because I know you did have the 2 pin din record, which I talked to you about before, and that
yeah,
was you and another friend guitar player of yours. That's there in Amsterdam,
yeah,
and he was
Will
in
Plum,
Dogface
yeah,
Herman's, correct?
yes, as a
Okay,
drummer, fantastic
and
drummer too. Yeah, yes, and we wanted to get a band together that had
and you
no
did,
bass or
and you
drums.
did.
It sounds just
But I
stupid,
tell you
but
something,
hey, it was
as a
fun to
No
do.
Means No
So
fan and
it's
as an
fun to
Andy
do.
Kerr fan, when I listened to that record, I heard that you were doing it and then I checked it out. It was like, okay, there's that sound. There is that voice. There's that guitar playing. It was all the things that I've been missing since Hiss and all, really, which was in the 90s. And so it
Yeah.
was all those things that were just completely you, that no one else does. And so it was really satisfying for me. But of course,
Mm.
being like the loud rock guy I am, I was like, I wanted to hear drums and I wanted to hear bass, but I was like, but those songs are great.
Oh yeah. We had several offers actually. People were
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
"Well, if you
yeah.
ever need a drummer,
I
you know
I'm
where to call."
surprised nobody just sent you, because with home studio recording and stuff. I'm surprised no one just sent you that record with guitar and
Yeah.
bass. I mean,
Yes.
with drums and bass on it. I'm surprised nobody did that. Yeah. So what
Yeah.
are you up to currently? Does that band still do anything?
But at the moment, and I was on a lot of other people's projects over the last 2 or 3 years, sort of during the COVID era, and then till now. I did a half an album with Howie Reeve, and who is
Oh
a
wow,
acoustic bass player from Britain. He was great, and completely different type of music than what I'm
that's
uh,
great.
I'm used to playing, and it was terrific because I just needed to. He plays these really sort of intricate, sort of avant-garde bass lines, and he asked me, well, just fit in something along there, and I ended up doing that, and
Awesome.
it was fantastic to do. So I did that. I was part of the project for Larry Boothroyd from Victim's Family. He did a specimen box, which he invited all these musicians to sort of contribute things through
Wow.
the internet, so to speak, and
Wow.
then he put them all together. And so there's that and that. And I was on an album recently by Mo Staiano from Surplus
Wow.
1980 from Oakland. Did something for him. Did something for Seb Radix, who's got a new album out called 1977. And
That's
so, yeah, all
great.
these various things. Not so much for myself, but this last half year, um, because I had so many just bits and pieces that weren't songs. And so I thought, you know what, I'm going to put out the bits and pieces. And so I started posting these things that were like a minute
Wow.
long, a minute and a half long, and doing a little video for them because I thought, I like this minute and a half. And I always come back
All
and
right.
listen to it. It's just not a song. And it might never be a song. It may be a
And
song.
where are you posting?
So
Where
that's
are you
what
posting
I'm doing
those?
now. I was
No
just on
shit.
YouTube on
Okay,
my
I got to check that
channel.
out.
Yeah. And just also weird stuff like I was goofing around with some drum sample things and ended up writing this sort of gothy 80s
That's great.
instrumental. It's like, yeah, sure, I'll put that on. Why not? I don't
Yeah.
care. It's all out there. I was working the last 2, 3 weeks on this one song, which was I had a video of me that I just made for myself so I wouldn't forget it, sort of improvising a song that ended up being about a minute and 30. And I completely forgot about it. And then I was cleaning up my computer. I was like, oh, what's this? I was like, oh, that's okay. I'll learn how to play it. And so I learned how to play it, and then now I added drums and bass and another guitar, and I've been fighting with my guitar sound until today, I think. So I used the Rat and I should have gone to the Rat
Yeah,
to begin with, but I
yeah.
feel kind of bad now, ignoring it and trying to sort of putting it to the side and trying to come up with some
Yeah.
different sound. It really just gone
Rats are
straight
unto themselves, man. They are
straight to.
specific. And really
They can
can.
do
They
so
really
much.
can.
It is
They're
insane. I mean, you really can
I
get
think you're right.
almost
I
any
think they
sound out
get
of them.
pigeonholed
It's
as like the most extreme thing they do. You know what I mean? Like, oh, it's a rat. But you're right.
yeah.
They do kind of do very other cool like things. Yeah. I always
Mm.
ask everybody, and I'm not going to keep you much longer because we're at about 40 minutes now. But what was one thing that maybe it's a one that got away, like was something you've had stolen or had to get rid of or whatever, some piece of gear through touring or whatever it might be.
Wow, that's a really good question. I don't think, um, ooh, I mean, in terms of the No Means No gear, I mean, I still have the Bandmaster, but it is has a American electronics in it, so I've played it here, but only through a transformer, which is
Right.
I almost got shot to death using that. Um, and it's just not appropriate for the venues that I play
Yeah.
because they're so small and it's so loud. And it's not the amp I want it to be, but I still have that. So I
Okay.
have it, but I don't use it. I would love to have had taken a one of those
Oh,
PA bins
right.
from Victoria, the ones that just because it was such a unique sound with the horns
So
on it, which is again
they're still in.
ridiculous. But
Oh,
the
go ahead. I was gonna say
biggest I don't know I don't I think they were just
Oh,
a local
wow,
company
wow,
that
wow.
made them in Victoria. There were some I saw pictures years ago on the internet of that the University of Victoria had some that they had in their listing of I guess for music practice at the university or something. I don't know. But what I miss the most actually is not musical instruments. Is that when I was in the band, um, I was also DJing at a local club, and we were playing at this club. And one night, with a great deal of my records there, because it was just easier than taking them home. I just had like half of my record collection was there, and someone, I say someone meaning the club owner, quite likely, though I cannot prove it,
Oh my God.
burned down the club, and and uh, our amps were in there, and that's how I got the Bandmaster. That's right. The reason I got the Bandmaster now I remember. Yes, it was because the Music Man that I was using burnt down, and Robbie's acoustic amp, the first one he had, It was great. But I said
Yeah.
he had a 5-band EQ, these things on the side, and we went in there the next day, and there were these 5 black lines that had dripped down the front of his cabinet, which was just the melted plastic of things,
Oh
sort of
my
like the Black
God.
Flag logo, only like 5 of them. But my records, half my record
Oh my
collection got
God.
burned up in the fire, and that I after I lost that, I just thought I'm never going to be that record collector again. So anyway, that's the story of. I'm glad I remembered it now. That's why I got the bandmaster because I absolutely.
Oh,
Oops,
well,
we're reconnecting.
well,
Uh,
that's a great story. That's a great story for how you got the bandmaster.
yeah, sad about my records, but I didn't really have any gear stolen or I treated my gear very poorly. I used to just leave my guitar just flat on the ground in front of my amp, and no
Well,
guitar stands or anything like that. Always, move my own gear, which I was always very proud of. Still to this day, I don't like anyone doing that because I think, why are you doing it? It's my gear. It's like I,
right, right,
you
right.
shouldn't have to work for me.
Well, I think it's
It's like,
fantastic that you still have all of that stuff. That says a whole lot about you. God, Andy, let me just, at the end here, I don't mean to gush, but like I said, you were one of the people that pie in the sky interviews that I had when I wanted to, when I got pitched doing this podcast in the first place. So I just really, really, really
well,
appreciate your
it's nice
time.
to talk to you, Zach, and I'm sorry if I blabbed too much or didn't have interesting
I
stories.
wanted you to blab. That was the whole point. I wanted you to blab so much, and I got to get all of my detailed minutia nerdy questions answered. So that's all that really matters. And if you don't mind, I would love to contact you next time I'm in
Oh,
Amsterdam. I
sure.
think I'll
Are you
be
guys
there
coming
this
over to
year.
Europe this
So
year, though?
yeah, we'll be there in August.
Okay, we're
So
usually
yeah,
around in August. So
yeah. And everybody in my band would love, love, love to meet you. So
come
yeah,
play.
that
I'd
would
love,
be
I'd
great.
love to see you guys.